A failure of leadership at all levels leading to corruption, more specifically from the education sector as well. And there's a lot of issues that need to be dealt with there. Basil Manuel, the Executive Director of the National Professional Teachers Organisation of South Africa, or NAPTOSA if you prefer the acronym. Basil, good to hear from you as well. And I wanted to focus primarily on the education sector because a lack of leadership there. One day we could have a much bigger discussion and talk about how do we breed new leaders, but maybe that's a discussion for another day from the education perspective. Lack of leadership in schools, we know how badly this goes. I'll give you the prime example right now. We weren't feeding 2 million pupils just a few days ago.
Good morning, Gareth, and thanks for having me. Gareth, yes, it's worrying that when we have such huge responsibilities, and when you think about the example you mentioned in KZN, the largest province in terms of pupil numbers, and for us to blunder in the fashion that we did, when we know that so many thousands, hundreds of thousands are dependent on feeding, speaks to a lack of leadership, but it speaks to a lack of leadership with conscience. And that is what we want, because it's very easy to point out corruption, but we need to be fixing it. Too many people are pointing out the mistakes, but we are not finding out what are the answers, what are the solutions to that. And we're waiting with bated breath, for example, to see whether today there's a change in that blundering that happened in KZN. But it also goes to things like the report from SACE and the increase in reports of abuse, the increase in the number of children still being given corporal punishment. It's such leadership, and that leadership stems from schools. So we have to up our game in school leadership. We're talking about Labour and Labour Day having been celebrated. We can't celebrate it when there are things that detract from the dignity of the labour in schools and in our communities.
And that has a knock-on effect, of course it does, whether it's that sort of lack of leadership in society, in labour, from the parental side as well, because when we start looking at the knock-on effect for schools, resources, as we know, are stolen because no one is being held accountable. Pupils are confronted with deadly violence because police leadership is not there. And this manifests itself not just through the pupils who start repeating this behaviour, but also it starts affecting the schooling and their education, but also the teachers as well. This is not what teachers, Basil, I'm sure you'll agree, should have to be dealing with. They're there to educate. They're not there to try and put out the fires of bad parenting and bad leadership.
Gareth, and that's one of our biggest issues, is what teachers go through on a daily basis. I know that everybody has now, post-COVID, focused on catch-up, but catching up is not the same as healing some of the scars that have happened there. The trauma that teachers have been through because of the job that we've put on the shoulder of teachers. Yet at the same time, these people are running the gauntlet every day. And then when we look at the occupational health and safety issues around schools, where schools are still overcrowded, where the very health issue that COVID pointed out to us, we are ignoring again because our schools remain overcrowded. When we think of the quality of schools that we still have, when we think about the ablutions, which you all have featured so much about over the past, one has to then say that we are failing miserably when it comes to the health and safety, not only of teachers, but of teachers and the learners in the school. And then, of course, if you are still met with all that by parents who are not necessarily playing the game, the community vandalizing the very places that we are trying to keep together, then we see just how difficult teaching has become and what an amazing job the people that hang around are in fact doing.
And Basil, I'm going to stay with you as long as I can here. I know our team are keeping a very close eye here on Newslink on the resumption of the Senzo Mayiwa murder trial. So I hope not to cut you off. So I hope you don't mind if I do interrupt you in a few moments, but they haven't resumed as yet from a tea break. But I want to ask, as we start getting to the elections of next year, when we start seeing how pupils and students view their teachers, view this lack of leadership from the teaching sector because they're not being led themselves as far as teachers and schools are concerned. What we're doing is we're raising students, we're raising pupils to one day come out and try and be responsible members of society. But I imagine there's a lack of trust in leadership, which is worrying for me, because how do they then go and vote as responsible citizens if they've not ever been truly led? I know I'm kicking the tin a bit down the road here, but elections are next year.
Gareth, it's a real issue. And of course, it has to do with this triumvirate that runs schools. Leadership isn't vested only in the teachers. And I will stand up and say, we have many teachers doing a fantastic job. But the job of a principal is so much bigger. And we know that principals determine the direction of their schools. Principals determine the success of schools, with the support of teachers, of course, but they are the direction givers. And then it's the parents in the department. And if these are not working in concert, we are not going to get the desired results. Yes, we need more leadership examples. Yes, we need people to stand up. And the department's failing is in its lack of support and training of principals. The principals have to take the responsibility for running good schools and being accountable to parents and draw the parents in. There are many willing good parents. Not everybody is bad, but there are far more good people than bad people. We need to harness that. And only then will we see leadership coming to the top. I fear for kids who've never had a good example, because you follow what you know. You become what you have been taught to be all your life. And if you've had no good example, what then do we expect of you?
I mean, I hate to use the cliched question of where does the buck stop, but I suppose it's the only obvious question here. If we're talking about leadership and a lack of leadership in the education sector and how teachers are meant to do just their basic jobs, where does that buck stop? Is it all the way at the top? Is it the education minister of higher or basic education? Where would you like to see this particular issue land on the correct desk of?
Gareth, that's $1 million question and a very difficult one, because one can never assume that a minister sitting right at the top can make all these changes happen in every community. We know that that won't happen like that. However, example starts at a place. But every teacher is given a certain amount of authority, and that authority in the class shows leadership. You're either the teacher that is there every day doing the job, or you are the person that stays absent every now and again. That's a prime example of how one person shows good example in the same school where another doesn't. But it goes to the principal of the school. Are you leading? Are you demonstrating leadership to teachers so that people emulate it, but also to the learners? So in short, I would say, I think at every level, there's opportunity for leadership. At every level, there's opportunity for example. One can't just put it at one place, but every school is a microcosm of its own community. And if we want the community to respect the school has to up its game to show that there's leadership and there's direction at that school.
And that's exactly what we need. Basil Manuel, thank you very much indeed, Executive Director of the National Professional Teachers Organisation, NAPTOSA, of course, joining us here talking about leadership.